Louisiana versus all y'all with a little Tiger Details feel. Jarrett Roser and Julie Bodwin getting ready for this much anticipated LSU football season. We're now less than 2 weeks away from the season opener in Orlando against Florida State. And we've had a couple of weeks of camp to try and get more and more of a sense of this team. Julie, what's going on? How we feeling down in the Bayou parishes and how we feeling as LSU football season approaches?
I'm feeling a little less busy these days. Feeling good about LSU this season, though. I'm really intrigued and excited, I think, just like everyone else, to see what this team puts together in year two under Brian Kelly. A lot of talent for the Tigers.
Someone asked me yesterday before Coach came to the press conference podium after practice, was this the year that they won another national championship? And I think there's no doubt it is the year that it feels like they have the best chance, that they're most heavily in that conversation. They open the season as the number 5 ranked team in both of the major polls. And
Right.
There's just a vibe around the team, I feel like. You can kind of hear it in the way they're talking about themselves and their expectations. How much has that kind of caught your attention? Just the energy, describing it to people who haven't been there at all, who don't interact with these coaches or players,
Yeah.
what they're bringing to these conversations.
First of all, I think there's always some sort of like vibe, swag. I think it's like a Louisiana thing. Maybe it's an LSU thing. But yeah, this year especially, you can just tell there's a lot more confidence coming from that practice facility, and rightfully so. There's talent all over the field, especially offensively. Returning pretty much their entire production from last year. Jaden Daniels, the steps that he's going to take in year two. And then on the defensive side of the ball, there's a lot of talent. There's still some unknowns, but if everybody meets expectations, and obviously things never really go according to how you want them to go in college football. There's always some twists and turns along the way. I think that's part of the reason why everybody loves it. But it's just, it feels a little different. You don't obviously want to compare anything to 2019 because that was just special. And I don't think anybody knew going into 2019 what 2019 was going to turn out to be. So it's not the same feeling as that. Yeah, I think they can do some really big things. I still need to see. This first game is going to tell us so much, as it did last year. But obviously, there's so much from week 1 to week 2. There's always a lot of growth that happens. But this team should be much more prepared for Florida State this year than what we saw last year. And let's remember, like they were, even though they lost last year, that they were very close to making a comeback and winning. In the end, that didn't happen. But as much as everything went wrong last year, like in week 1, they were still close to winning that game.
It's interesting you mentioned, and I think anyone that thinks this is the 2019 team, just calm down a little bit.
Yeah,
but
please.
That's become kind of the gold standard. And so in any number of ways as a measuring stick, any comparison or juxtaposition people try to look at. And so I saw fans when there was conversation of not only the continuity, but the amount of offseason work Jaden Daniels and the receivers were getting in together. It's like, oh, this reminds me of Burrow and those guys that summer. And then the first days of camp, there's a fight that ends up being one of the biggest storylines probably of camp so far, and probably overblown. And there were some people that were frustrated and didn't want to see that. I don't think understand that does happen more than necessarily people realize. And then there's people saying, oh, I remember those fights in 19, national championship team, baby. Like if we're fighting in camp, we're going to win a natty. What was your initial reaction to that little scuffle? And we can kind of move on from it from there, because I do think it was overblown, but it has been one of the notable storylines.
I saw a lot of that kind of like what you're talking about talk on Twitter from fans and that sort of stuff about, like that's how 2019 started, and I don't think there's any kind of, like, you can't really compare. It's apples and oranges. There's 2 different teams, and that kind of stuff, like you said, those kind of, fights or scuffles or shuffle, whatever you want to call them in a preseason camp, let's remember how hot it's been here lately. Like, let alone like just walking to the mailbox sweating, but actually being in full pads, like hitting people in 100+ degree weather. There's bound to be some flare ups, some tempers. That's part of like this whole process. It's part of a training camp. It's like growing pains. It's feeling each other out. A lot of these players, you and I know personally, just from over the years of covering them in high school. Like, we know their personalities. We know how, I can specifically, and he wasn't involved in this fight, but I can specifically remember before Will Campbell signed, when he was at a June camp at LSU. And I think you know where I'm going. I see your head shaking.
Mm-hmm.
It was the first time I had ever seen, maybe you can remember who it was. I can't. He was beat in one-on-ones. I had never seen Will Campbell beat in one-on-ones. And he did not take too kindly to that. And there were some that had to, kind of settle him down, cool him off. And I don't remember, like I said, I don't remember who it was, but these
I
kinds of things happen.
I think it might have been teammate Quincy Wiggins that beat him on the
I
rep, and then Ali
You're
Gay
right.
and some other guys were all in the mix, and it was just
Yes.
a tense situation for a second.
Yes, you're right. It was Quincy. So, and obviously Will got, the best of him on several occasions as well. That's just how those kinds of things go. And obviously you can't really correlate one-on-ones to what happens on the field. But I'm just like, that's the first thing that popped into my head where, he had to be settled down. He was pretty hot and wasn't taken too kindly to getting beat in those situations. So when you think of it, in the practice field where, everybody's kind of getting acclimated and used to each other, it's 100+ outside. You're dripping sweat. All you probably want to do is, finish the practice and get off the field. And obviously maybe there were words said. I have no idea. I haven't really dug into that. I don't think it's that big of a deal, and I don't think it has anything to do with 2019.
Another big storyline: Denver Harris ends up being away from the team for a couple of days, or at least not in the team picture, didn't practice for a couple of days at a position that I think we look at as one of the big positions that we're focused on
Yeah.
under a magnifying glass with all those new faces in the secondary. Denver came back a few days later. He's been practicing the last couple of days, but what's your take on that cornerback group, that secondary that has had some additional ups and downs and curveballs with the J.K. Johnson injury and
Mm-hmm.
then the Denver Harris situation, and just what you expect from that position group heading into the season? And they'll be tested right off the bat with a great Florida State offense.
100%. Florida State's loaded. They have a very talented wide receiver room. So you said it. They'll be tested in week one. So I was looking at the roster and depth chart and trying to predict those kinds of things earlier this week, and I still think it's an area, a room of concern. JK's out. We don't really know. Denver's back. It doesn't seem like he's in the circulation for playing time with the ones yet. Obviously, that can, if he gets his stuff together and things begin trending in the right way, then obviously things can change. But you've got Deuce Chestnut, you've got Zy Alexander, you've got a guy, a freshman who's having a hell of a camp in Ashton Stamps, one of the most underrated players in the state last year. Another guy, LT, that you and I are very familiar with, and who's had, he hasn't made as many plays in this camp as what we saw in the spring, but that's a guy that they're going to rely on. You've got Sage, who's out there and looking like he might get some time with the ones for corner, and he has some versatility. They can use him at nickel, they can use him at safety. We'll see what that's going to look like. But I do think there's still some concerns about depth in that room, and that position group being very important, and the upcoming recruiting class, and trying to really bring in some talented guys that may be able to have to see the field early in their career. And obviously, Ashton Stamps, like I said, one of the most underrated players last year. He's just having one hell of a camp and making play after play and looking like he's going to see some early playing time and a lot of playing time for the Tigers this fall.
Yeah, I think that's huge. He's a guy
Yeah.
that I really liked as a prospect, but I didn't think we'd be hearing this much about him this early, and they need it.
Same, 100%, 100%. I expected that maybe we would see him in some games like Grambling, maybe Georgia State, maybe we'd see him get some or time in those games, some significant time in those games, maybe have the opportunity to work his way on the field later in the season once he's comfortable. It's really difficult for some players. Obviously, not everyone. A freshman, you're coming in, finding your way, making your way on the team. It's the first time you're probably living away from home, from your family, on just understanding everything that comes along with taking that next step from high school athlete to college classes, just juggling it all, handling it all, making sure your mental's right, physically being right, and to get on the field. It's very difficult for a true freshman to come in and start day one. And it says a lot about a person whenever that can happen. Um, and it's looking like, Ashton has it figured out early in his career.
And I think with that position, Denver Harris came in and he had the recruiting profile and he came from the
Mm,
big program in A&M. And so there was a spotlight on him in terms of that transfer group. And so when what happened with him happened, it seemed like, and Twitter is kind of a virtual panic button in and of itself, but I saw some people kind of hitting the panic button about that cornerback spot. Zy Alexander is coming from Southeastern, so he gets overlooked a little bit, but he's someone that
yeah,
I thought had a chance to be in the mix as a top guy in that room anyway. And it seems like we're hearing more and more of him throughout camp. And so as much
100%.
as there's been some uncertainty with the JK injury or the Denver setback from just a disciplinary standpoint, when you hear Zy having the camp he's having, you see some of what Deuce is doing and Ashton, I have a level of optimism in that group. And particularly, you mentioned versatility before, having that third safety and Andre Sam come in and some of the things they can do now with
Right.
Andre, Greg, and Major all on the field, and help out with that nickel, slide Sage outside. I'm really, I don't know if I'm crazy, if I'm looking through purple and gold glasses, but I'm pretty optimistic about what that group can do.
I Don't get me wrong. I think they can gel together and really kind of develop that chemistry. Do I think it's going to happen right away? No. Just because I think, like we said already, that Florida State wide receiver room is pretty impressive. And we know what the quarterback can do for them. So I think it might take a little time. Obviously, they need everyone to stay healthy. That's another thing. Can LT stay completely healthy? Can Major stay completely healthy? And fingers crossed that can happen for both those guys. And like you mentioned, JK, that was a guy that I was really intrigued to see, and one that I thought maybe would really have a chance to play early this fall. And obviously going down with the injury, and it's giving Zy, like you said, what is he, 6'2", 6'3", he's got long arms, he's long.
Yeah, he's a big, long
Um,
kid.
he's won some reps, he's lost some reps, but let's remember he's going mostly against Malik Neighbors, and that's a hard matchup for anyone. But going against Malik day in and day out is only going to make Zy better. So I think you're right on with him and the potential that this group has. They just need guys to stay healthy.
We hit on that secondary so much, so I don't want to be all day talking about just the defense. I know we're both excited about Mason Smith back healthy, Hal
Yeah,
Perkins in his second year, and what that front seven can do. Savion Jones continues to get bigger and bigger. Somehow a lean like 290 right now, but still looks
yeah,
trim and is running fast.
yeah.
But on the offensive side of the ball, I'll let you kind of take it if there's a position group you want to start with, because there's interesting spots. There's a deep receiving group, a deep running back group, some offensive line shuffling right now where Hurd is now getting some early reps in the first team. Where do you want to
Uh,
start?
Man, you said all of them. Let's talk about Zalance Hurd for a minute. Obviously, we've covered him pretty extensively over the last few years, and knew his potential. And he's another one like Stamps, where I thought maybe, but the O line kind of had a feel like in the spring, you kind of thought, okay, this is set. This is going to be, maybe there might be a little competition at center, but that kind of seems to have settled down. And it looks like Turner's, won that role. And so it just felt like, okay, they're good with who, and then here we come in fall, and it's like, oh, wow, the Lance is ahead of the curve. And I'm just really intrigued to see what if Miles Frazier gets, kicked out of the ones, if Zalance comes in. I'm just really intrigued to see what that's going to look like. And I'm very excited to see him and Emory Jones next to each other. Those are two dogs that, I mean, I can't wait to see what that side's gonna look like, and those two next to each other. And another guy that I've been hearing a lot about, and I've been hearing a lot about him actually for the last couple of months. I don't think he's gonna crack the rotation anytime soon. And maybe, maybe he's a backup with the twos, but is DJ Chester. I mean, that guy is much bigger and larger in person than I realized when covering his recruitment the last year or two. And there's been some positivity about him as well. So the O line and what LSU has this year and the next coming years. I mean, what Brad Davis has done to really turn that around. It's really exciting. And the offense should be for the next few years behind that line. The offense with the guys that we know they have in the running back room, the guys that we know they have at wide receiver, the commitments they have, Nussmeier behind Jaden Daniels. The offense should be stable for the next couple years. And
Yeah.
I'll let you go because we mentioned so many guys in that, but I mean, just the talent that they have. I think the big thing is maybe even holding on to all of that talent after this
Yeah.
year, because I mean, we didn't even talk about the running back room yet, and I don't think anybody knows. Maybe only Frank Wilson knows at this point. Maybe he has no idea who's coming out, in that first drive against Florida State. There's guys that could do it, all in that room. And, it's been a freshman that there's been a lot of talk about lately. And I don't know if he's really even going to see the field against Florida State in the big, he made the Georgia State game, or Graham, maybe that he sees some action then. I'm talking about Caleb Jackson, obviously, but that running back room is just so deep as well.
Yeah. It's the offensive line group, and mentioned Mason Lunsford too, the transfer from Maryland that some of the coaches have talked a lot about during this fall camp. But I mean, a year ago or so, our former Rivals coworker Nick Harris, who's now with the Dallas Cowboys, and I did one of those question pieces that Rivals does, and he asked me if I thought Lance Hurd had a chance to come in and play and start as a freshman the way his former teammate Will Campbell did. And I said I thought he had that type of potential, that talent, but looking at the roster, what was coming back, and I thought that was the biggest thing in his way, was all these guys returning, and it hasn't seemed to matter yet. He's pushing it anyway, and that sets up incredibly well, not only for this season, but as you mentioned, year 2 for him, which would be year 3 for Emory and Will and company.
Yeah.
And then, but in modern times, who potentially leaves if that's the case. And so I don't know. We'll see. You kind of transition some to the running back group too. I don't know that Frank knows. There's 8 guys and a lot of them are really good. We saw several guys get opportunities last year, and then you just had that much more talent. And so part of me looks at Josh Williams and what he proved last year, a former walk-on, and how reliable he was in pass pro and all those things. But Noah was a huge role last year, and we're going to see a lot of him regardless of who's taking first snaps. And then you've got a 1,000-yard from scrimmage guy from Notre Dame and Logan Diggs coming home. It's a good problem to have for Frank Wilson, but that's a place that I don't feel overly confident. It feels like it's a hot hand situation.
Yeah, I kind of agree with that. Like, whoever's having a good week in practice, whoever's has the early hot hand. I mean, it's a good thing though. Those guys will they'll stay fresh throughout the season. Does everybody stay happy with the amount of playing time? I have no idea. We don't really know how all of that'll work. But I mean, you have you have guys like John Emery's back. This should be it, I think, for him. If I'm not mistaken, I'd have to pull up the information, but I think this would be his last year. Like, can he come in and finally meet the expectations that were kind of put on him as a 5-star when he came out of Destrehan? You obviously have Trey Holly and Caleb Jackson there as freshmen who what a 1-2 punch those guys are going to be whenever their numbers are called and whenever it's their time to see significant reps for LSU. So that room is just one. It's kind of like a question mark. Like, what is it going to look like? Who's it going to look like? I have no idea. Like you said, I don't even know if Frank knows. It's going to kind of probably be a week to week thing because there's multiple guys that will be able to get it done. We didn't even mention Armani Goodwin yet. And so, it might depend on the matchup. It might depend on who they're going against, like the defenses, what they're showing, what they want to do that week offensively. And it probably will be a combination of all of that we just said. So it's a really talented room. And I think it's probably going to be a very competitive room. There's a lot of guys in there with a lot to prove. Not necessarily to us, but I just knowing some of them, they want to prove it to themselves. This is, Logan coming back. That was big for him to come home and to be able to play for this state, play for Brian Kelly again. LSU, that was the offer that he really coveted when he was in high school at Rummel. And if I'm not mistaken, correct me if I'm wrong, the offer came in late. In his recruitment process, but he honored his commitment to Notre Dame. And so that was a big deal for him. And so, John Emery, a lot that he wants to prove, and so it's going to be really interesting to see how all that shakes out. And here we are talking about running backs and the most talented. We didn't even talk about probably the most talented room that the team has is receiver, and how much we expect to see LSU throwing the ball to that group, especially guys like Malik and Kyron Lacey, Brian Thomas Jr., Chris Hilton Jr., who's having an incredible camp, finally healthy. Hopefully he can maintain that health because he is just probably the most athletic guy on the team, and it's kind of starting to flash a little bit in camp. Could really be a burner that like really helps them open things up offensively. And so can Jaden Daniels, can he take that next step? Can he get those long balls? Can he be accurate? Can he read the defenses the way that he needs to read it? And I think from everything that we're hearing, all of that has happened and is going to continue to happen. And he's much more settled and comfortable, and just what this offense can do. The tight end room, it looks so much different than last year. Mason Taylor's added a little weight going, he had an incredible freshman year, and there's big expectations for him in year 2 and what he can do. And then obviously there's so much depth behind him now. So who knows who's going to have the big year? Like I was thinking about that the other day, that, obviously the big expectations for Jaden and Malik, but like it's always somebody that you don't expect. Somebody's going to have a breakout year that wasn't expected, or it's just going to have one of those 1,000-yard seasons. Is it going to be a Kyron Lacey who's like really, he has also a lot to prove to himself and to others. So I'm really intrigued to see what this group's going to look like. Expectations are high. The talent is there. It's just a matter of putting it all together.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned with the running backs, are they going to stay happy? The receivers and the running backs, everything that you hear from them is absolutely the right thing. The thing that the coaches want to hear in terms of their comfort level and working together, competing. And so that's really encouraging when you talk about all those guys. We didn't really talk about Aaron Anderson, but he's someone who's going to be a big part of this offense and special teams, and some of those freshman receivers that are coming in and bolstering that group. There's a ton of depth all over that side of the ball, and they all seem to be in the right state of mind of just go do it when you have the opportunity to be on the field. And when it's not your turn, it's not your turn, but everybody's going to eat at some point.
100%. And I'm just thinking, like, now you said, I don't know how I could forget about Aaron, but to have him on the field with the potential of like Malik and Chris Hilton, like just like spreading them out, and then like we didn't mention Kamorian Kempton, who is just like a freak in the tight end room, and just like his catch radius and what he can do. And so to like get all those guys, those athletic, freaky type of players on the field all at once, I can't wait to see what it's going to look like.
Oh, there's potentially double-digit NFL pass catchers on this team by the
Yeah,
time it's all said and done. Yeah, that's crazy.
yeah, yeah.
Anyone else you want to mention, or any other dynamics you're watching? We've got, I guess, 11 days between now and that kickoff. Something that you're just kind of intrigued about that we didn't hit on yet.
Not really. I think the biggest thing is, we talked about it pretty extensively, is the LSU secondary against what some of those guys from Florida State can do. And I know you were trying to do a little research on Florida State this week and trying to catch up and talk to some of those there's full of Louisiana talent for the Seminoles as well. So I think that's going to be probably the biggest thing to watch. I'm really excited to see Mason back out there. What he can do, what Savion, you mentioned him. I think like he's almost up to 290, maybe 285 ish. I saw him and Mason and Will right before fall camp, and I mean, just to see what that's all going to look like when you have Perkins behind them and just running all over the field. And so for me, the biggest question marks are on defense, but I also know that side of the ball is chock full of talent as well. It's just a matter of getting some reps for some guys, maintaining your health, and building that chemistry and that bond as the season progresses. But you have to come out week 1 with a win. You have to find a way. You can't have what happened last year happen 2 years in a row. You have to, with the expectations on this team, with the talent on this team, like you said, number 5 in the preseason polls, there is a real chance to make a deep run at this. Everybody has to stay healthy, and you have to get a win. It's crazy to be thinking like, oh, must win week 1, but it does feel like that.
I gave Savion 290. He had weighed 288, but that was at the start of camp. And in 105-degree camp, he might be like 270 by now, with the way that this heat has been. But
he's much bigger than what he was at St. James. And it shows, and he carries it well. So him, out there with Mason and Wingo and those guys, it could be freaky. We'll see what happens. I'm really intrigued to see how those guys put it all together.
Yeah, but keep up with everything we've got going on. This is on the Louisiana vs. All Y'all channel, and as Julie mentioned, we have some Florida State content. I had a chance to chat with one of their assistant coaches from Louisiana and one of their players from Louisiana, so that'll be up in the next couple of days, and we'll certainly be checking in with Julie throughout this season. It's going to be a fun one to watch for LSU fans and everyone around Louisiana.
Yeah, I can't wait to see how it unfolds. And what did you say? Is it 11 days? I can't believe that it's gone
11
that
from
quick
right
this
now.
year. This summer has just kind of flown by. 11 days till Florida State. Wow, should be a fun one.
You got it. See y'all soon. Thanks for watching.
Thanks.